Let us pray. We pray tonight for all the people who live and work in Basingstoke-on-Deane, for those living in the centre in the flats, for those living out in the villages, those living in the suburbs and in the countryside. We pray for those who work here, who play here, for those who are cared for here in homes and hospitals. We give you thanks, Lord God, for all those who give their time serving others in this community through many voluntary organisations. We pray for the work of this committee here tonight, that they will be mindful of the needs of those who have no voice and depend on you to be heard. We pray for wisdom, humour, and a tight control of the agenda. Amen.
Settle down.
Yeah, they don't participate, do they? So, there's only one for the FSP now, so change that thing. That's all right, I've done it.
Members could settle down. Could I have apologies for absence, please? I have Councillor Keith Watts.
Councillor Laura James, isn't it?
Councillor James, Laura James.
Councillor Waldridge.
Councillor Gavin James. Thank you.
That microphone wasn't on there. Can you check they've all got their cards pressed in?
Can you just make sure you've got your card in, because otherwise the microphones won't be working?
And you probably need to speak up a bit as well.
I'll bring this forward. Councillor Reid.
Another one.
Is that working? Yes, it's working.
That's working.
Now. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Stephen Peach is running late, but should be with us soon.
Any declarations of interest? Councillor Jones.
Yeah, on paper it's Melly Down and BasingstokeGov.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Councillor Baker.
Enough. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A member of the local government pension scheme, so I should leave for that item.
I don't think that is required on this item, thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was going to declare on the local government pension scheme as well, but you're suggesting perhaps we don't all have to do this?
I've taken advice and it's not required. Otherwise I would be as well. Councillor Golding.
No.
Mr. Mayor, I work for Thames Water, which the water issue's coming up later, so I work for them.
Okay. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On matters concerning the local plan, I have a personal interest as per my register of interests.
Thank you. Councillor Eatis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If the football club comes up at the end on one of the questions, I do have to leave the room.
Councillor Putty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On paper, dealing with LGPS, I've got an interest.
Thank you. Tony Curtis.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I declaring an interest on behalf of the two directors in relation to item 8.2 on the agenda, interim arrangements for the Chief Executive. And Mr. Mayor, whilst I'm standing, I have a feeling that not all the cards have been pushed in, and that's why some of the microphones aren't coming on. So if you could all please just double check you've got your cards firmly pushed into the slot. Thank you.
If we can move to the minutes of the council meeting, 17th July 2014, paper A. Councillor Raffel.
Mr. Mayor, at the last full council meeting, I think there was a debate, a motion on water companies concerning surface water rebates. And I wrote personally to three directors in two of the cases and someone else in relation to another one. And I got 3 replies, and I had a flood of information. But if I cut it short, you could say I was drip feeding you. So I'm going to give you a steady flow of information. From South East Water, they said this: although South East Water is a water-only company, we act as a billing agent on behalf of Thames Water, so that our mutual customers can receive a single bill for water and wastewater services. Our bills explain our arrangement with Thames Water and provide Thames Water's contact number and details. I do believe, however, that the information we provide could be improved by specifically referring to surface water drainage, and we'll look to incorporate this going forward. Thank you for your feedback. And it then says we do put up information about Thames Water, and this is the bit that we say about Thames Water, which is as follows. If my application is successful, how will you calculate from when to backdate my surface water drainage rebate? I can see some of you wanting to declare an interest at this point. It gets more exciting, but it's very important to some parts of the borough. Before April 2001, the surface water drainage charge was included in the general wastewater charges. However, from that point, a national change was introduced to allow customers not receiving surface water drainage on their property to have that part of the general charge removed. If your claim is investigated and accepted, the date the rebate will be given from will be determined by the age of your property and the time you've lived there. And it talks about going back to the 1st of April of any particular year and the like. I got a reply from Thames Water which said this. So bear in mind, South East pointed me in the direction of Thames. Thames then gave me this reply. I'd like to confirm the notification about the surface water drainage charges provided in the column on the right-hand side, usually on the 2nd page of our bills. And it mentions that the customer may qualify for a rebate and provides the amount their bill could be reduced by. And it also has a web page all about it. As we do not hold information, because remember the question was quite convoluted and asked for lots of different things, including could we have an answer about postcodes for every single person in the borough to try and assist them. And so they got the full whack of the question to try and see what they could come up with. As we do not hold information relating to the connection status of every single property in our area, we cannot identify the postcodes of roads within the borough of Basingstoke that qualify for this rebate. Applications are considered on an individual basis and are based upon the information given to us by our customers at the time. We are currently conducting a full review of our current surface water drainage policy to provide greater clarity and a more consistent approach across the industry. So there we are. There's a little bit more to that. And then we've got a massive reply, which I shall take shortly, from South West Water. And they say that they apologise that the situation regarding eligibility, that's always a good start, isn't it, for this rebate has not been made clear enough for me, I think it was, as you feel we do not do enough to promote the rebate. And it then starts to outline in great length, but it basically says, our policy is that we will not backdate our surface water drainage rebate further than the current financial year, or potentially back as far as 2008, if a neighbour in your postcode reported that their property does not drain into the public sewer. And putting it bluntly, if someone in your road has claimed, and you can prove you were living there, and they've got it, then they'll possibly backdate it to when they claimed. And they go into the history of the whole thing, which I'm not going to bore you with. The long and short of it is, it's quite a complicated situation. They're all saying that if you apply, they will look at it sensibly, and they're all saying that they've put information on their bills about it. So I think all we can do as a local authority, which we've put a little bit in Basingstoke today, Basingstoke and Dean today, is keep telling the residents that they might be entitled to it, and if they are entitled to claim for it. Because it doesn't apply to everybody. Of course, if you're in a rural area, generally it just gushes off into the middle of nowhere, and you probably have to pay for your own drains to be emptied. But it's just that small proportion where it does go and they might not have to claim. So I hope that answers your question and you're all still awake.
Thank you, Councillor Ruffell. In view of the torrent of information that you have provided, I would suggest that you distribute that to all members. With that said, are we content with the minutes as they stand? All in favour? Thank you. I will sign them later. Announcements, and I'm afraid I have a few. But first of all, my thanks go to all those councillors who supported the Basingstoke Variety Show. I'm delighted to say that we have just had an accounting for that, and it raised approximately £5,500. And in addition, I was talking to the young carers last week, and as a result of having been chosen as one of my charities, they have so far had direct donations sufficient for them to continue paying one of their outreach workers for another 6 months. And that worker would have been laid off otherwise. So we've actually had a fairly instant benefit from the charities. And just to remind you, the Big Bang in War Memorial Park will be on November the 1st. My charity lunch on November the 13th has been sold out. Thank you, members. There will be a charity carol concert at St Michael's on December the 13th, a charity quiz night on January the 31st at Beacott, which will be chaired by Kevin Ashman of Eggheads, and the charity dinner will wind up the year at Audley's Wood on April the 17th. Our staff are to be congratulated again on the award of 2 green flags, as both War Memorial Park and East Rock Park have been named among the best in England, having excellent facilities and being beautifully maintained. So my congratulations to all concerned for that. On a more serious note, I attended the safeguarding training which was available to all members. I was disappointed to see that only 8 councillors attended that training. I found quite a lot in that training that I wouldn't otherwise have known, both as a councillor and as mayor, and I would encourage all councillors who have not had that training to get in touch with June Balcombe, who is happy to arrange another session. And I think that that training was absolutely essential, because it can deal with everything from going out to see a constituent on your own, and so many other things where you'll put yourself at risk as a councillor. So please have a look at that training.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have 2 announcements. Both, I hope all members will agree, are good news. The first one relates to the Federation of Small Business Awards. Mr. Mayor, all members will be aware of the work of our economic development team, overseen by Di Hayward, who's here this evening. Sitting next to Di is Tim Coleman, who I'll introduce in a minute. I think all members would agree that our support to business of all sizes is valuable, but particularly the work we do to try and assist our smaller businesses. Tim is the chair of the North Hampshire branch of the Federation of Small Business. He's been to full council before to present an award, and he's at it again this evening, but in stereo this time. He's a great friend and ally of the council, incredibly hard-working on behalf of businesses in our borough, and is a board member of the Enterprise M3 LEP, and one of the driving forces behind it. And I'm proud to say I regard Tim as a great friend to us all. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to hand over to Tim to present you with the awards. He'll probably want to say a few words. I've never known him miss an opportunity to do so. Mr. Mayor, so if Tim could come up, there's a mic there, Tim.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, Chief Executive, councillors, officers, ladies and gentlemen. Quite often people start a presentation by saying it gives me great pleasure to be here. In my case, it really does give me great pleasure to be here. As your Chief Executive has just said, this isn't the first time I've had the pleasure of presenting awards relating to the work done by Basingstoke and Dean Council relating to small businesses. Federation of Small Businesses has around about 7,500 members across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and 2014 was the 6th time we ran the awards programme, and every local authority bar one in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight entered the programme this year. There were only 2 categories, those categories being the best all-round support for small businesses and the best individual programme. So it doesn't take Einstein to realise that if I'm presenting 2 awards, your council has done rather well in both of them. The first award, where Basingstoke and Dean Council actually took the main honours, is for the best all-round small business friendliness. There were a number of aspects to that award. Support for Small Business Saturday, engagement with businesses of all sizes regarding broadband, particularly in rural areas, training programmes for small businesses, support of the Connecting Biz networking group, and so on. There has been tireless work by the economic development team, not only under the leadership of Di, who is standing there, but also I would like to acknowledge, and this isn't just a mutual admiration society, but acknowledge the work done for many years by Tony Curtis, who I understand won't be coming to any more of these presentations, certainly in his existing role. So on behalf of all businesses, Tony, thank you very much for what you've done. But now, for the awards, the best all-round small business friendliness, we have a gong of some sort and a certificate. So congratulations for that. Thank you very much for your work. And then for the most innovative, small business friendly programme, campaign or project, there has been a lot of work going on in Top of the Town. It is considered by the FSB to be one programme, but there are many different elements, from the support for regenerating shop fronts to retail revival. Again, programmes associated with Small Business Saturday. And although I regret you didn't quite scoop the main prize there was only one highly commended. And so again, it gives me pleasure to present the certificate for the highly commended in that category. Mr. Mayor, congratulations. And hopefully I will be here next year presenting. We will be running the awards next year, and so we hope you'll go again. And again, I have to say, you will have strict competition next year from Eastleigh, as I think you're all aware that a leading member of your economic development team, Natalie Wigman, has jumped ship. I'm sure she'll be doing her very best to win an award next year. But thank you all very much. Thank you. Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Oh. How are we going to stand? Thank you. Thank you very much. Cheers, Jim.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I said I had two announcements, and I feel quite lucky to be standing here on the very day that the resident survey results, the headline results, were reported in the Gazette, and some of you will have seen those results, and some of you may not have done. But I thought it would be worth sharing those results with members, because I think it's something that everyone in this room can be proud about. We've just published the preliminary headline results from the 2014 resident survey. That survey is representative market research of 1,100 residents by face-to-face interview. The results show really significant improvement in customer satisfaction in our borough. And I'll just share some headlines, and I'm going to skip out, for the sake of brevity, skip the 2012 results and go back to 2008. In 2008, 87% of residents were satisfied with our area. That is now 96%. In 2008, 58% of residents were satisfied with the services they received from the council. That is now 84%. In terms of delivering value for money, in 2008 we scored 43%. That has now risen to 70%. And something I think all of us recognise is whether people feel safe and whether they feel they belong. In terms of belonging to their area, in 2008, 58%. In 2014, 88%. Feeling safe during the day has gone up from 91% to 98%. And feeling safe at night, where a lot of people, have a real fear of crime and antisocial behaviour, has gone up from 56% to 87%. When I shared those results with colleagues at national level, the word that came back was they were stellar results. Mr. Mayor, I think everyone would agree that given the challenges which the council has faced in recent years as a result of the economic downturn, the reduction of funding to the council, these are indeed outstanding results. As I indicated just now, I've made some inquiries, and to my knowledge, these are probably the best results in the country. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, if I could crave your indulgence, Mr. Mayor, as this is the last meeting of full council that the Chief Executive, Mr. Curtis, will be attending in his capacity, it did seem to me only right that we ought to mark that occasion with formally noting the appreciation of the council as a whole for all the hard work and commitment that he's given to the borough during that time. The last few years haven't, as he says, always been easy. And at times he's had to tread a very delicate path, I think, between trying to move the council forward and retain political impartiality, both for himself personally, but also for all other officers. I think the results of the survey that he's announced today are testament to the way that he has been able to move the council forward in its service delivery and effectiveness, and the resulting benefits that that's had for the quality of life of the borough. They do say that you should always quit while you're ahead, and that's exactly what he seems to be doing, though, as we know, his decision to retire was actually made before the results of the survey were known. It's just a pity that the results of his football team don't live up to the results of the borough. Tony, if I may say so directly, on behalf of all members, can I thank you for the tremendous contribution that you've made to the borough and wish you a very long and enjoyable retirement.
Well, having had those awards and heard the results of the latest survey, on top of the green flags, I'd just like to say thank you to all the staff that have made that possible. And that does include Tony, but all our staff have done a wonderful job, and I'd like to show our appreciation for them. And on the subject of quitting while you're ahead, and having heard that survey, does that mean the leader will be leaving us? Right. That item 5, there are no questions from the public. Item 6, petitions. And the first petition that I'm due to receive is regarding Old Down and Beggarwood. It should be declared a local nature reserve. Would Mrs. Chris Rose like to bring it forward? It should be.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Old Anna Begwood Wildlife Group petition the Chief Executive and the leader of Basingstoke-and-Deane Borough Council to immediately designate Old Anna Begwood woodland parks as local nature reserves and protect them for the people of Basingstoke forever. We originally asked for designation in October 2012 when HBIC granted us SINC status because we met the criteria set out by English Nature, who say, "We believe contact with nature is vital for well-being and quality of life, and that everyone should be able to benefit. As accessible green spaces close to where people live, local nature reserves can help achieve that. Not only do they support and protect habitats and species, they allow people to get close to nature and appreciate the contribution it makes to their quality of life. L&Rs are places to play, learn and explore that can also deliver significant physical and mental health benefits. They're typically close to where people live, and they can be reached on foot, by bicycle or bus. We have a letter from English Nature supporting our designation. Initially, it was rejected by officers in March 2013, but the portfolio holder's decision notice of October 2013 supported the designation in principle, but postponed it for the time being. And the reasons for that decision were: 1, to avoid potential conflict between nature conservation and existing and future uses on the two sites, and secondly, to ensure that the situation is reviewed once there is clarity on the likely requirements for any additional facilities or proposals on both sites, and clarity on the Council's approach to the management of its green spaces arising from the emerging commissioning agenda. No mention of a road here, then. Oakley councillor Diane Taylor was assured by officers that there's no plans for a road across Old Down and wrote in Link in January 2014 to that effect, and I quote, "With regard to the relevant S106 agreement, BDB 41005, dated November 1998, I can confirm that the Council have not reserved a right-of-way for a road over Old Down Woodland Park, and nor have the original owners. BDBC acquired the freehold of Old Down Woodland Park in 1998. The transfer provides that the area must be used as a woodland park, with part used as a community centre, and there is no right-of-way reserved or granted for a road across the area." Only after Maria Miller wrote to Tony Curtis did we learn the truth. In an email to me on June the 23rd, he said, "Thank you for your email. Therein you state Mr. Curtis insists that the option to build a road across the site remains open. Whilst that would indeed be my advice to the Council, I'd like it to be clear that I can only advise, not insist, and any decision is for the elected members." The advice contradicts all the wonderful declarations in the Council's own green infrastructure policy and also their ecological policies in the draft local plan. We were formed in 2007. We have a committee group of volunteers. In 2013 alone, volunteer hours were 2,029, and about 1,200 or so far this year. Our recording groups have identified 31 species of butterfly, 40 species of bee, 297 species of moths, and 55 bird species. A significant number of these species are at risk or are declining nationally. We put on community events, organise local walks, talks, and work with groups such as the Brownies and the Scouts. In addition, we are the only site in
1 minute
Basingstoke
remaining, please.
that is managed primarily for wildflowers on chalk grassland with 230 plant species. We're recognised as being comparable in terms of species richness to Magdalen Down, which is a butterfly conservation trust site and highly regarded in the conservation world. We have 5 LNRs in Basingstoke, but they're all to the north and the east of the town. People come from across the borough to see the flowers and enjoy the views. Old Down and Begwood deserve this designation on their own merits. Our petition is in 3 parts. First, a paper petition of 210 names, the online petition of 1,801 names, and of those, 400 have also given comments, giving their reasons, and I've printed these off as well. This amounts to 2,011 signatures. There are other alternatives for a road across South Manydown. If you wish people to engage in democracy,
Could you come
you
to the
genuinely
conclusion,
need
please?
to listen to their opinions. Old Down should not be for sale at any price.
Can you turn the microphone off, please? And that will be passed to the portfolio holder, Councillor Aegis. The second petition that we have from Councillor Dunlop, petition to keep the public conveniences in Bell Street car park open.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My petition is very straightforward. As you say, it is a request to this council from the people of Whitchurch to keep the public toilets in Bell Street, Whitchurch open. Should that plan be enacted to close them, this will be the second financial blow that our commercial people in Whitchurch have suffered. The first being the removal of the brown sign which directed people to the silk mill. That has cost the silk mill untold amount of money. If we lose the toilets, visitors to the town will literally go elsewhere. So may I please present this to you, sir?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that will likewise go to Councillor Aegis for consideration. Item 7, resignations and appointments. To receive resignations from committees to make any necessary reappointments. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have 3 changes to make. For audit and accounts, Councillor Stuart Frost is resigning and Councillor John Leake will replace him as a permanent member. And then for HR, Councillor Cathy Ossleton is to be replaced as a permanent member by Councillor Clive Sanders, and Councillor Ossleton will remain as a sub. And then Councillor John Leake is to be replaced as permanent member by Councillor Elaine Still, Councillor John Leake to remain as a sub. Thank you.
Thank you. No others. Moving on to B, Council to approve the appointment of Keith Bastin as the Chairman of the Standards Committee for the Council year 2014-15. Is everybody agreed to that? Thank you. Then moving on to Appendix B, to receive resignations from outside bodies and to make any reappointments and fill any existing vacancies. Councillor Laura James.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can nominate Councillor Jane Frankham to the Community Everest Community Management Board.
Are there any other nominations? No. All agreed? Agreed. Nothing else. Reports for decision. Reports and recommendations made by Cabinet and committees. And first is Human Resources meeting held on the 8th of September 2014. Local Government Pension Scheme Discretionary Policy Statement. Councillor Mrs Tucker to introduce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have pleasure in presenting the report and recommendations of the Human Resources Committee of the 8th of September regarding the Local Government Pension Scheme, requesting full council to approve the recommendations on the revised discretionary policy statement as set out in the appendices. Thank you.
Is that agreed? Agreed. Number 2, Human Resources again, meeting 29th of September, interim arrangements for the Chief Executive, paper D, pages 5078 to 5079 of the minute book. Councillor Tucker to introduce again.
Becoming a habit, Mr. Mayor. I have pleasure in presenting the report and recommendations of the Human Resources Committee of the 29th of September concerning the interim Chief Executive arrangements to carry out the role of Head of Paid Service until a permanent Chief Executive commences employment. Firstly, that the Director of Borough Services and Director of Governance and Commissioning are jointly appointed as Interim Chief Executive and share the duties between them until a permanent Chief Executive commences employment. And secondly, that the statutory position of Monitoring Officer, currently undertaken by the Director of Governance and Commissioning, is permanently designated to the Head of Governance and Commissioning. Thank you.
Could you just introduce little C? I can take it as on the paper. I'll take it as on the paper. Is that all agreed? Thank you. Right, now moving on to 3. Cabinet meeting held 30th September. Community Infrastructure Levy Draft Charging Schedule. Paper E and page 5084 of the minutes book, to be introduced by Councillor Raffel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to put this before full council and propose the recommendation to you. I'd like to thank, to begin with, the members of the Economic, Planning and Housing Committee for all their helpful contributions. There has either been an email that went round yesterday, or there was about to be an email which deals with some of the responses that were raised from members, which were all very helpful. We're now going out to consultation, if you agree, and provided there's nothing substantial, then it can go off to see the planning inspector. I perhaps don't need to go into detail to try and explain the community infrastructure levy. Those who are at the meeting will know what it is, and the rest of you will fall asleep if I try. So that's my proposal. I look for a seconder.
Is that seconded?
Oh, there's one here.
Councillor Wadena.
Yeah.
Right, I will call on Councillor Potter to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Raffel for his introduction. I shall be voting against this recommendation. I see the smile on his face, but I want to explain why, if I may. I mean, a very substantial paper, but in particular, I'm highlighting the report which we have from Three Dragons, the most recent of which is the July 2014 report, which deals with the viability of both the Manadan site and the Basingstoke Golf Course site. I looked at today the definition of viability, because I think it's always tempting for us to say viability means nothing other than financial viability, but the Oxford Dictionary definition is a bit more qualitative than that, talking about making something able to happen or having a reasonable chance of success. What I highlight in particular, and I disagree with much in the Three Dragons report, is their analysis of Manadan not being a viable development at 40% affordable housing. And I don't think I'll get it tonight, obviously, from this council meeting, but I think this council, I've said it in other places, has to commit itself as one of the public landowners relating to Manadan to this policy of 40% affordable housing. In simple language, it seems to me, and I've said it before, if we can't get 40% affordable housing at Manadan, where can we get it? Constantly within the Development Control Committee, I and other colleagues are faced with substantial developments and substantial developers saying the scheme that we have is not viable if we seek to comply with your policy of 40% affordable housing, having regard to our land costs, having regard to the infrastructure we're providing. It just isn't economically possible for us to sell the houses and, quite frankly, to get something between 17 and 20% profit, which obviously is the figures that we're working on. If this council, having gone through the tortuous process that it's gone through in getting where we are today, 20 years on from when Manadan was acquired as part of the partnership with the Manadan trustees and with Hampshire County Council, if we cannot secure 40% affordable housing on that site I despair. And I think this council has to say something very unequivocal in regard to its position on this. And I think this is the opportunity. I know we're entering into very sensitive negotiations. I'll probably be told that by colleagues opposite in due course in regard to our negotiations with Hampshire County Council and the Manidown trustees. But our position as Basingstoke-and-Deane Borough Council should be very clear on this. We bought this site, or part bought this site, based on money that we'd achieved in terms of the sale of council houses, so that high quality social housing could be provided on Manidown in large part. And that promise, it seems to me, to the council tenants that we had then applies now as it applied then. So on that basis, Mr. Mayor, I say that because the Three Dragons report is an integral part of the report that we have before us tonight, it's wrong for this recommendation. The formula is to be passed tonight, so I will be voting against this recommendation.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tonight, Mr. Mayor, I think if we agree the recommendations as they stand, we really do run the risk of SIL being set in such a way that events may overtake us. The inspector's letter to the council shared with members yesterday is very clear. The inspector is seriously concerned that the local plan may not provide a sufficiently robust platform for providing new homes in Basingstoke-and-Deane or an adequate strategy for delivering that objective. He also has concerns about the deliverability of a number of other aspects of the local plan and key environmental concerns which he sets out below. You will appreciate that the initial concerns the inspector has raised relate to fundamental matters at the heart of the local plan. It is because of this, and with the aim of avoiding any unnecessary expense in mind, that he has drawn to your attention these issues now, and points out that these do not necessarily represent the only concerns he may well identify, and reserves his position for the time being. He then goes on to say that he wants the council to give full consideration to the contents of the letter. He also raises concerns about sustainability, numbers, environmental issues such as siting housing around the Chinham incinerator, the impact on the Loddon, and individual policies within the local plan. This is his first response, and we already face serious questions. So I would like to constructively ask the Cabinet member to give his thoughts and how he plans to deal with the fundamental concerns. We're not going to get a chance to hear his view because there is no debate on the letter this evening. There's no element on the agenda this evening. And it won't be on the agenda at the next council meeting because the inspector intends to hold his exploratory meeting on the day of the next council meeting. And that exploratory meeting will have huge implications for us in the way we go forward with the local plan. And that has implications for SIL. That has direct implications for this report because it all stands and falls together. It isn't as if you take the bit and parts. And right now there are developers who are trying to get out of delivering their Section 106 agreements, arguing over viability, trying to avoid delivering affordable housing, while they see their own land values increase, they see their profits increase, and they see the prices of the houses increase. And we know that many of the sites listed in the plan have already come through the system. And they will not be applied through SIL. SIL will not apply to them at all. So these developers are getting away with not paying their fair share of the infrastructure costs to mitigate their development. So the taxpayer's left picking up the bill. The taxpayer will be left picking up the bill one way or the other. And that raises all kinds of questions about profit, viability, how the SIL's been written up, and where it may go as a consequence of the debates and conditions of the EIP. We do not accept the assumption that Manidown is unviable at 40% affordable housing. The land values are a baseline, and they're mistaken set against the reality that we are seeing in the market. We only have to look at the land values being traded in the town, let alone our green fields, to see that Three Dragons' approach is not only oversimplistic, it completely misses the point of what is actually happening in the market in Basingstoke-and-Deane. The inspector's letter fundamentally questions the local plan. And to accept this SIL tonight, while those huge questions remain unanswered, would be rushing in without thinking. All of this is linked. It hangs or falls as one, not as separate parts. Each bit needs to work in conjunction with the rest. So all we're really calling for tonight, and I hope the Cabinet member can give us assurance, is that the right reflection will be given on the big issues that are being set out to us to ensure that we all serve our residents properly.
Thank you. Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I sit on the Overview Committee, which is called the Manidown Overview Committee. I sit there with the intention of being constructive and positive, and I believe I have demonstrated that to date. During those meetings, I have consistently and reasonably raised the issue of us as a council having a policy of 40% social housing and regularly being told that different plans for different housing issues across the borough fail to achieve 40%. So I raised the issue at the Manidown Overview Committee because I see the Manidown development as a key element of our land ownership contributing significantly to us being able to deliver 40% social housing. And on each and every occasion I've raised it, with the advisors, with the people who are helping us to plan how we should develop it, with the cabinet member, I get, well, maybe if, I don't know, we'd have to see. In other words, no commitment to our policy of having 40% social housing. Then, according to this particular report, the Three Dragons, which is a key element of it, and let me read just a sentence. It says, the development of Manidown strategic site is required to carry a substantial additional cost. On the basis of the analysis undertaken, Manidown is not viable development at 40%. Now, if Manidown cannot produce 40% social housing, we are failing in our responsibility to the people of this borough by not ensuring that our policies are implemented for the purposes of housing and housing in an affordable way, social housing people in accordance with our policies. So I'm not surprised I won't support this. The reality is every time we get to the point of delivering 40% affordable housing or 40% social housing, we fail. And it's the only policy that I'm aware of that we have stuck to whilst continuing to fail it. And it is shameful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keating. Councillor Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did not support this at EPH. SEAL is replacing a perfectly acceptable 106 system with a substandard set of complicated regulations. SEAL is a never top-down, one-size-fits-all imposed on local government from this centralised government. This is not localism, Mr. Mayor. It's never central diktat on local government how to raise money from developers. This government should actually trust the local authorities to organise its own way it gets its money from developers. And we've had 106 been in place since 1990, and all of a sudden they come in and they introduce this seal, which will leave Basingstoke and Dean a lot worse off. In the paper it mentions 141 million shortfall, and seal will not cover that shortfall. So the residents of Basingstoke and Dean are actually going to be worse off due to this seal mechanism being imposed on Basingstoke and Dean. And it's very complicated, Mr. Mayor. We have top slicing. The parish councils can get 20 to 25%. If there's a neighbourhood scheme, they can get 25%. But if you've got a neighbourhood scheme, your regulations are more relaxed, so you can spend it in better ways than we can as a strategic authority. So it's all over the place. So I just can't support it, because in 15, 20 years' time, when we've got massive deficit infrastructure and Basingstoke comes to a standstill, the seal regulations will be a part of that. So I cannot vote in favour of seal. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Tilbury.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, yeah, I can't say I've got much sympathy with this either. It's suggested 3.3 that this is expected that SIL receipts will not fill the gap for the infrastructure deficit. Well, I think that's the understatement of the year. £141 million deficit, and we're talking this may raise to £27 million. But it's £27 million. In September of last year, when this report went to the committee, we were talking about it would raise £50 million. So we've lost effectively half the money in a year. The vast difference between the rural and the urban areas now creates a perverse incentive for this borough to build houses in the rural areas, because we will actually raise £150 if we build them in Oban and nothing if we build them on Manydown. Well, that's just quite bizarre, really, isn't it? I mean, over the last 10 years, house price inflation has averaged about 9% on an average size house of the 90 metre square referred to in here. That would raise about £20,000 a year. Oh, sorry, that would increase in value by £20,000 a year without them even building it. You know, that's the value that it increases by. But the SIL would only raise on that same property about £13,000. So the developers, we always talk about developers' contribution. Developers don't pay anything. They make the money from the inflation, the cost of the land and the house prices, and then the person who buys the house actually pays the money at the end of the day, don't they? So, I mean, we talk about risk at 7.12, but as we talked about, as Councillor Harvey has raised, the problems we've seen with the local plan, we are in real trouble now. We don't really have a local plan, but that's going to get delayed again, which means that SIL is going to apply to even less and less properties as we go down the line. And as we heard from Councillor Keating with Manydown, you know, this is the one area we thought we could get 40% affordable housing. To be fair, they're not saying we won't. They're saying if we want 40% affordable housing, we won't get any SIL money. So we're not going to, where's the infrastructure going to come from? Potentially from, we can ask for more Section 106 money, but the whole thing is just such a muddle. I don't see how this is going to help. And if you look at the amounts of money, I mean, I've done some sums, I think you'll struggle to get £27 million, because we know what the developers are like. They'll find a way of not paying this. How often is it going to be reviewed? It needs to be reviewed every year, doesn't it? Because if house prices are going up 9%, surely the SIL should go up by a pro rata rate. Really. You know, if we keep it at a rate now, the houses won't be built for 3 years, but it'll be fixed presumably at the time they get planning permission. I mean, this is just a bit of a mess. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Cubitt.
Yes, thank you. I think some very interesting points have been made about this paper, but what will determine how I vote is obviously in the response from the Cabinet member, specifically on the commitments to the 40% development of affordable homes on publicly owned land. It has been known from the beginning of the coalition government that we as councils were expected to release and concentrate on land that was publicly owned to build on. And we've singularly failed in Basingstoke in the last 5 years. And I think it's a really serious issue, which is referred to in the paper in the recommendation. And therefore, I'd like a commitment from this Cabinet, and specifically from the Cabinet member, that Manydown will provide a minimum of 40% affordable homes, irrespective of the viability issue.
Thank you. Councillor Golding.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to say I agreed entirely with Councillor Potter and what he said about 40% affordable housing on Manydown. I've said it publicly on various occasions. I said it in my own responses to the local plan, and I continue to stand by that. I do not accept that having 40% affordable housing means there could be no SIL on Manydown. There are many criticisms that could be made of the viability analysis, but tonight is not the time to make them. I will, however, be supporting this recommendation because it is a recommendation for consultation and proceedings of public examination. And we have been talking about these things for a very long time internally. We're not going to resolve them internally. We need to move forward. So I shall vote for it purely to get it moving forward, get it in the public domain, consultation, examination, because that's where it's going to get resolved. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Raphael, can you sum up?
Well, Mr. Mayor, sometimes you get invited to a party and It's a while since I've been to one of the party where they play music, but I think if you go to a disco and people start dancing a jig, you get a bit confused. And that's exactly what's happened here. The fact of the matter is 40% hasn't been abolished, and Councillor Potter has led the charge into a different battle, and he more or less admitted that. He was saying this is very much a vehicle for having that discussion, but it isn't actually what this is about. For those members who are not familiar with this paper, let me remind them of the following. Paragraph 3.7. The Manydown is the largest site allocated in the revised pre-submission local plan will accommodate 3,400 homes. The latest viability assessment factored in the estimated site-specific Section 106 costs of 40% affordable housing, the spine road, sports facilities, 2 primary schools, open space allotments, library and a bus service. The impact of these costs on the development is there is no headroom for a SIL charge based on either the static or discounted value. Consequently, a zero rate for Manydown is proposed. That's zero rate of SIL. There'll still be 106 agreement and there'll still be the 40% affordable housing policy. And they went on to say, the report says, it's not uncommon for large-scale sites and resulted in a nil rate being set for the strategic developments within Winchester City Council and nil rates being proposed for strategic sites in Teth Valley Borough and Fareham Borough Council. As far as the paragraph 2.16 is concerned, it says this: on the basis of the analysis undertaken at the current time. Now, members opposite know exactly what that means. That means today, 2014. It doesn't mean 2015, doesn't mean any time during the rest of the plan. It just means today. Manydown is not a viable development at 40% affordable housing and with the higher level of planning obligations modelled. And so, what it is saying is, at the current moment. Now, that's an assessment. That doesn't mean the policy has changed. It just simply means that the analysts say it's not viable at the moment. The fact is the policy will remain the same. Well, perhaps I could just finish, Mr. Mayor. The policy will remain the same throughout. The viability will increase as land prices and housing prices increase, and so consequently, I'm sure the viability will return. I'm afraid I can't give the commitment that Councillor Mrs. Cubitt asked for, that we commit to 40% regardless of viability, because it simply won't be built if we did that. So it has to. The policy remains 40%, and the viability will determine the rate that it's built at. So, as I say, I encourage members to send this forward. I know if Councillor Keith Watts was here, he would have seen sense and told the Liberal Democrats exactly what this is about, and that this made sense at committee. So, as I say, members, I urge you to put this out to consultation and not to try and delay the local plan, which this would be if you defeat this. I am slightly surprised. Well, the reason I chuckled was because at every stage of this discussion on the local plan, the Labour Party said no. No, no, we oppose, we oppose, we oppose. Well, that's no good, is it? Because, you know, what about saying, yes, this is what we would do? So, Mr. Mayor, that's the position, and I urge members to support it.
Mr. Mayor, I was named by Councillor Russell. Can I just make one point, because it relates to...
If it's very quick. Yes.
I refused not to name him when he spoke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to highlight one thing. There isn't much, as I say, within the Three Dragons report that I agree with, but particularly I refer colleagues to page 20, which is subparagraph 513, and this is, I think, a very important point that this council needs to consider in terms of its what I think is a social responsibility as well as the financial responsibility it has. It reads, however, the land for the scheme is in public sector ownership, the borough and the county councils. I know we know that, and it is open to the owners to accept a lower land value than the benchmark used to provide both 40% affordable housing and the full range of planning obligations modelled. If this option is taken, it should not affect the benchmark land value used in our reports for assessing viability of other strategic schemes, which I think is somewhere around £400,000 per hectare, which is the quoted model. The point I make, I hope to make it again, is that as a public authority with a commitment to 40% affordable housing, some of us would say social housing and the true economic rent that we would seek to apply, we can adopt a different approach to the way that we develop Manydown if we if we choose to do that. And that's the commitment we need from this council. I'm disappointed, following what was said to Councillor Ruffle tonight, he isn't prepared to go part way towards that. So be it, and this will go out to consultation if it's agreed. I still will vote against it because of those inadequate aspects of the Three Dragons report.
Right. We'll then move to a vote. I'm pretty sure we're not agreed on that.
No.
Can you both sit down?
I'd like
Can you both
I'd like
sit
clarification,
down,
please, on how
Councillor
it's going to
Cubitt?
delay the local plan, given that I was
Councillor
named.
Cubitt, will you please sit down? The situation on being...
Well, Mr. Mayor, the Constitution has changed on that point. It says in paragraph 8.15 on page 92 of the Constitution that the fact that a member has been named in debate will not in itself be accepted as a reason for allowing a personal explanation. Preceding that, a member may make a personal explanation at any time. A personal explanation may only relate to some material part of an earlier speech by the member which may appear to have been misunderstood in the present debate. So it's if a member has said something and someone else has misunderstood it, then it can be corrected. Now, well, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Cubitt, there is one final point, Mr. Mayor. The ruling of the Mayor on the admissibility of a personal explanation will be final.
And we will now move to the vote. And we will be voting electronically, so I trust you all remember the instructions from last time.
I have to wait until they're told.
If you can just bear with us. Coming up on my screen. The vote is now open. For, against, abstain. Can we just have order while the vote's in progress? Right. Has everybody voted? Because I'm going to close.
There's two who haven't voted. Councillor Cubitt hasn't voted, Mr. Mayor.
Well, no, she doesn't want to. It's not compulsory. Okay. Right, I'm going to close the vote.
Recommendation is agreed, Mr. Mayor.
Recommendation is agreed. And we move on. Right, reports by council officers. Report before us regarding the review of polling districts and polling places. Paper F, is that agreed? Councillor Leaks.
Mr. Mayor, there is two typos, and one of them is somewhere in Newbury. Page 7 of 15, I'd like to point out that Tadley Community Centre is in New Church Road, and that's one word. And the other one is Tadley Community Centre, Newbury Church Road, Tadley. So if you could get that array, I'm happy then. And once I'm happy, everybody should be.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is the first time I've seen this report. I am a little disappointed. I'd made some representations on behalf of my constituents and noticed that we're still favouring using schools. Now, some of the constituents that approached me have had to find extra money for childcare when the school's shut. So they were a little bit concerned, and I've missed picking this up in this report. And so particularly in Bramley, there are other sites available that are community halls, and it's not a great inconvenience if we could change that. So I have to just register that. I don't know whether it's too late. Thank you.
That is noted, and hopefully the officer will respond. Councillor Putty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With regards to Beggarwood, we have had inadequate porter cabin that has been placed for several years there. And this year, I would really appeal that there is a porter cabin which is fit for purpose. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bierman.
Mr. Mayor, as we're correcting addresses and so on, I'd just like to ask that the under Chinham, or basically Sherfield Taylor's Farm, we get the correct address. There's no place in Taylor's Farm called Sherfield Park. Either call it Taylor's Farm or just call it Sherfield on Loddon, but not Sherfield Park, if you would be so kind. Thank you very much.
That will be noted. With all those points, are we agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Community Governance Review, Sherfield on Loddon. Are we all agreed? Right, moving on. Notice of motions. Number 1, as per the list. Councillor Gavin James.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I should be very brief. I apologise for the late changing to the wording, but we wanted to make sure the motion accurately reflected what we're trying to achieve. And effectively, we're trying to achieve two things. You'll all know that the local infrastructure funding was part of the New Homes Bonus, and 40% of the New Homes Bonus is given to local communities to design what they feel would benefit their neighbourhood with the consent of councillors. One of the challenges we have in the Eastrop ward is that there are a number of organisations located in the ward that don't necessarily serve the local community specifically, but have a wider remit. So the second part of the motion deals with the challenging question of when we get applications from organisations based in Eastrop wanting to do some work that benefits the wider community, is whether that should be Eastrop local infrastructure funding, or whether it should be taken from a wider area, or indeed whether it should come from strategic infrastructure funding, the other 40% of the New Homes Bonus. It's a challenging one, and when I spoke to the officer, she seemed to would like to benefit from some assistance from the council, and the motion simply asks us to go to a committee to look at what is fair and right and just to make sure that we don't exhaust Eastrop's funds on infrastructure spending that isn't actually driven by the local residents, but driven by organisations just happen to be based in Eastrop ward. The second part, or the first part, if you like, I'm doing it back to front. The first part of the motion deals with some of the issues you have when you have a number of community buildings based within the same ward. Again, this one probably affects the town area more than anywhere else, and specifically the town centre area and wards attached to the town centre. There is a risk, I'm aware of a number of bids coming in, where local organisations are looking to diversify to use their premises more fully. Both the applications I've seen, one that's in and one that's in drafts, are on their own absolutely very sensible. But both of them have many similarities. There is a risk that if we don't organise some way of looking at what facilities are in the town centre, accurately recording them, that we'll end up with duplication and then not actually effectively using the lift to its full effect. To give an example, someone wants to build a music studio in a porter cabin over the back of the orchard. Whilst that's eminently sensible on its own, there is a risk that that may conflict with what all exists at the Proteus Creation Space in terms of performing arts, and also what may be available at the Haymarket, the Anvil and various other locations. So the other part of the motion is simply to ask the committee to look at what is in the town centre at the moment and the town centre area, and how do we make sure that we don't waste lift money on doing schemes in a number of different buildings that achieve the same thing. We end up with an oversupply, and in some cases we end up with organisations who get no funding because it's all gone, and there's opportunities missed to really benefit the residents. So I'm not giving any answers, it's just asking questions and asking the committee to answer them.
Thank you. Councillor Parker, you're down to second. Do you want to speak now?
Seconded, but reserved to speak.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As portfolio holder for the Top of Town, I'd like to broadly welcome this motion. I'm pleased to confirm to Councillors James and Councillor Parker the work along the lines they are suggesting has already begun as part of our continued commitment to the Top of Town. As they know, we have a long-term strategy for the Top of Town. We're bringing forward a programme of investment and improvement which is already increasing footfall, making environmental improvements and reanimating this important site for heritage, business and shopping for our residents. We can already look to the success of initiatives such as the Shopfront Grant Scheme, which provides match funding for traders and shop owners who want to improve their properties, the Purple Flag Week, which demonstrated the attractiveness of the town as an entertainment destination, and we've introduced a series of events such as the Eat Street Week, the Busking Weekend as part of the festival, and the exciting Christmas launch on Friday 5th December, plus the Small Business Saturday the following day. Much of this programme is focused on engaging with traders, businesses, residents and users at the Top of Town, and any proposals which help to progress this progress are extremely welcome. As the motion suggests, there is an opportunity here presented by the LIF to further this engagement by looking at exactly what the council owns and provides in terms of facilities, how these facilities are used and by whom, and how LIF funding fits into this broader picture and could potentially enhance provision for our residents. The excellent input of the local members to the town centre map is hugely valued, and I would welcome the opportunity to continue to pursue this dialogue about the LIF within the map. And I'm also very happy to bring forward a report to CEP which examines these factors in a strategic and coordinated way, and which underlines our long-term plan for the ongoing regeneration of Top of Town. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you to the movers of this motion for bringing us to this council meeting. I would like to see them amend it, but I'm not sure they would, for it to perhaps be referred to scrutiny, as I think we're in a situation where I'd like to see a much more fundamental review of the scheme as it operates currently, and to be frank, how it's abused in some situations as well. I have no hesitation, really, and I'm sure you'll want to reply to this, in naming Councillor Joe Erdina in terms of what I want to say. I notice there's a draft decision notice which is going to Cabinet next week talking about the use of LIF funding in Bramley. This relates to the expenditure of £354,000 for the provision of a footbridge over the railway line. We can all anticipate him skipping over this on his way to Westminster. And to be frank, I don't think I ever thought I'd be supporting the prospect of a Tory candidate being elected as a Member of Parliament, but I think I do on this occasion. It also allocates provisionally up front £95,000 from future new homes bonus receipts, which I'm fascinated by in terms of the anticipation of that. But the particular point, and I read it in the report, is that in regard to this proposal, it is neither supported by the colleague ward councillor nor by the parish council. These are conditions, it seems to me, that normally apply to the rest of us in terms of the way we seek to propose applications under LIF, but apparently Councillor Joe Erdina is exempt from this in terms of the way this goes forward to Cabinet. I mean, I guess this will be nodded through by his Cabinet colleagues next week, which is shameful, I think, in many ways, or perhaps they'll be glad to see the back of him like I am. But I don't know what the tactic is here, but I do think this type of thing is disgraceful in terms of the use of LIF money, and I think we need a fundamental review of the way this scheme is operating. I can't get it under the motion, which I do entirely support, but I would want this to be analysed further, and I'd certainly want to move it into scrutiny. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would just like to give a positive response to Councillor Mrs Terry Reid's endorsement of this motion, and I would just like to ask if there is any time frame she can offer us in regard to the preparation of the report that was mentioned.
Councillor James, would you like to what?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I can't give you a time frame at this moment.
Sorry, Terry, you can't. Sit down.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have to say I'm not particularly precious about what committee this goes to. We've clearly put Community Environment and Partnerships down as the most appropriate committee in our view, but it obviously is a matter for the committee chairman to decide who wants it. I understand Councillor Potter's feelings about the entire scheme, and obviously we've gone, I think, through 2 sets of bids, so at some point we should have outcomes for where bids have now turned into action, and that's surely something scrutiny could look at, but obviously it's another forum rather than the back of my motion in which to get that through to scrutiny committee. I think in due course it's something they should be looking at. Thank you.
Does everybody agree to that? Agreed. It will go to Community Environment Partnerships Committee unless they decide to pass the parcel. Right. The second motion, mover Councillor Harvey, the new cemetery sites.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This motion, Mr Mayor, seeks to secure in principle a bus route connecting any new proposed cemetery with the town that it would serve. I would like to put it on record that we think that this site is not the right location. North Waltham is isolated, and it's remote from those who will use it and visit it, and it raises a number of questions and issues that have not yet been addressed. We're talking about mainly, but not exclusively, elderly residents visiting loved ones in their graves, and the ability to easily access the cemetery is essential. Many rely on public transport. Many could not afford a taxi or a taxi share service, and so for many, the choice of the site has to be accessible to all. I've spoken to the local funeral directors about this location, and I understand their collective concern over the choice the council has made in this location. It's yet another example of the experts saying one thing and the council doing another. But it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that accessibility to the new site is a problem, when our own consultants who reviewed and analysed the site in question highlighted accessibility as a major flaw in the location. Now, I'm intrigued to know why Dignity would be happy with a council-run cemetery next door to their crematorium. I would like a firm commitment from the Cabinet that this council has no plans, and they will publicly state that they will not outsource the provision of a cemetery. The cost implications of that decision on local people and the impact on local independent funeral directors would be very significant, and I would like to see a firm commitment from the Cabinet that they will not outsource the provision of a cemetery. This decision is years late, because we're now left with very limited options, hence North Waltham being on the table. The reason why we are faced with it being the only option, allegedly. But if we considered South Manydown, for example, was a better option, the issue is the time taken to fulfil that option, the time taken to bring it forward, the time taken to bring any other site forward. We would need a smaller location in the meantime, and I do not use the word temporary location on purpose, because for those who would be buried there, it wouldn't be temporary. It is absolutely a smaller location, permanently used and chosen for all the correct reasons, that would then enable us to have the time to choose a larger and more appropriate site. And in terms of that, North Waltham is anything but, in the context of nearly everybody I've spoken to on this issue. And just for the record, the North Waltham number 55 bus is losing its county council funding. So unless we do something, unless we accept the responsibility that goes with the site in question that we're seeking to choose, there won't be at all a bus route that goes near North Waltham, let alone the cemetery. Now, I understand the commitment given by the Cabinet member on the buses at the Cabinet meeting. I do understand that. But I'm pushing, and we're pushing, for the Council's support to accept the principle that a bus route is an absolute prerequisite for this site to proceed, for any site to proceed. And we would like to see a planning condition attached to any planning application that goes forward for the cemetery site that has a bus route clearly as a planning condition. Otherwise, it will not be acceptable to many, many people in our town for whom it is meant to serve. This doesn't need to be complicated. What this needs to be is sensitive and understood. And after speaking to the funeral directors, I do genuinely understand their concerns about the current decision on the table. So I ask the Cabinet to give us the assurance it will not be outsourced, support this motion and support the prerequisite that a public bus route goes to whatever cemetery is chosen.
Councillor Regan. You say? Who's next? Councillor Aegis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At committee on the 17th of September, this was debated in detail, and then again at Cabinet on the 30th of September, I gave clear assurances that transport to a cemetery in North Waltham or any other site would be given top priority. I stand here today and I reaffirm that position. Transport to a new cemetery is not going to be overlooked. Transport will be available, and it is an issue that will be regularly reviewed before the new cemetery is being used. In the decision notice, a taxi share scheme is referred to. This was the favoured option when recommending the North Waltham site. It is something we have much greater control over. The provision of any bus service is entirely dependent on the number of passengers it attracts. The key fact is that no service provider, whoever that might be at the time, will run a bus service unless it is profitable or appropriately subsidised. Therefore, if the North Waltham site is selected and we agree that a bus service is a prerequisite, we as a borough could end up funding a bus service indefinitely. This would indeed be the case for any site where there is currently no regular bus service. It is worth pointing out that the other alternative sites suggested at the committee meeting on the 17th of September, only one of those is reasonably close to a sufficient bus service, and that site is not in the council's control, but nevertheless it is being investigated. Whilst I fully agree with many of the advantages of a bus service, I cannot agree that a bus service should be a prerequisite to any selection process. Indeed, it would be absurd to limit our possible sites to those with an existing bus service. If the new cemetery is in North Waltham, it may very well be that a regular bus service goes out that way in any event. We are still nearly 5 years away from a site being opened, and many things can happen in that time. A new hospital between Basingstoke and Winchester is a real possibility, and that will require a bus service along the route. I am always open to all transport suggestions, and I am happy to keep all options on the table, but I cannot agree that a regular bus service is a prerequisite to any selection process. A new cemetery is something we have chosen to provide, and it needs to be available in 2018-19. It is impossible to guarantee the availability and frequency of a bus service in 4 to 5 years' time. So I will finish by once again reiterating my commitment that transport to any new site is a top priority, and it will be properly investigated and considered. And yes, that does include the possibility of a bus service, but I cannot be exclusive to that tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Golding.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a disappointing motion. We had a long discussion about potential sites for a new cemetery at Community Environment and Partnerships last month. There was general agreement that North Waltham is not an ideal site because it's so far from the town centre, but equally it was clear that currently there are no other sites on offer which could be developed as a new cemetery before the current cemetery is expected to be full. Also, as the portfolio holder made clear at committee and as committee agreed, if there is a cemetery at North Waltham, the borough would need to fund a transport solution. However, Mr. Mayor, committee could not agree on the best way forward of providing a transport solution for a new cemetery. So as the minutes on page 5051 show, the committee asked officers and cabinet to undertake a feasibility study of other possible sites and to report back to committee with more information on the transport options. And the cabinet decision shows that cabinet listened to committee and agreed to investigate the feasibility of other potential sites and report back to CEP. So, Mr. Mayor, it is very disappointing to find that 2 Labour councillors think that they know the best way of providing transport for any new cemetery without waiting for the further evidence requested by the committee. It's far from clear that a timetable bus service would be the best option. A taxi share or car share service that picked up residents from their own homes at the times they wanted to go to the cemetery and took them right into the cemetery might well be more convenient than a timetable bus. So, Mr. Mayor, I oppose this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Bierman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm afraid that I'm going to disappoint my chairman on the Overview Committee as well by saying that I continue to have reservations about the bus prospects. I think the cemetery has to be accessible by non-car means, and I think the viability at that distance, with that sparsity of population in and around, is just a no-hoper. I think the nearer you get to the town centre, the more viable it will be to either have a special bus or either to have a special bus or to make other provision. But there is another angle. Put the buses aside, whether that's a good idea or not, and this is where I hope I'll be forgiven by the chairman for disagreeing on this. And that is, I was listening to the radio today, as I often do, and there was a discussion, I think it was in you and yours, about various cities in Britain failing on their pollution standards. And the minister came on and said how we were fighting all these things and the like, and we were going to address it and soon come up to good pollution standards. And one of the ways we were going to do it was by providing better facilities for cyclists. Now, there won't be many cyclists who will be cycling out to North Waltham for two reasons. One is the distance, and the second reason, equally important, is the safety in trying to get to there. Now, we're at the moment looking at road improvements up the A340 to the pleasure of, no doubt, Tadley representatives and so on. But are we making sensible provision as part of that for cyclists? And we're talking about a major corridor, and we're talking about the major corridor right near the town centre. And can we put in a sensible cycle infrastructure even there? No. So the chances of having a cycle route out to North Waltham is a no-hoper, and no doubt to the delight of Councillor Leake. But either way, the money won't be there, the will won't be there, it won't happen, so don't do it out in North Waltham. Thank you very much, and therefore I have to support this motion with regrets, Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, I was referred to, but I don't actually want to say anything.
Sorry, you haven't said any... I was about to say, Councillor Leake, that you haven't said anything, so I'm not sure how you could have been misunderstood. Councillor Edward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I understand the concerns surrounding a new cemetery, but we must remember that nearly 69% of residents who responded to the consultation said that the proposed North Waltham site was a good location. I do not share the belief that with some members in this chamber, that a site on Manydown would be appropriate. An area of the same size as the proposed North Waltham site will lose up to 10% of the housing allocation at Manydown, putting further stress on the rest of the borough to provide additional housing and reduce the viability of the Manydown development. Further to this, we must remember that Manydown is not wholly owned by the council, and the terms of our agreement mean that is for housing use first and foremost. With this motion, I think it is important to recognise the hard work that this administration is doing in delivering better facilities for our borough. There is no statutory duty to provide a cemetery, but even when we are making continued savings and keeping bills low, this administration is adamant that facilities should be improved for local residents. I have listened to the Cabinet Member for Community Services and the Environment at Committee, providing key assurances that transport is a top priority. Both the Cabinet Member and this administration recognise the need for transport options to any new cemetery, allowing residents to pay their respects. What we must not do, however, is limit the provision of better facilities by insisting that bus service must be prerequisite. Once planning permission has been granted and a site is sure to go ahead, then I have confidence that the Cabinet Member will look at all transport options, including regular buses. If we bear in mind the proposals for a new North Hampshire hospital, it is clear to me if the cemetery was situated in North Waltham, there could be a strong case for increasing public transport links to this part of the borough in the future.
After that round of applause, I'll just point out that that was a maiden speech. Councillor Gavin James.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I'm supporting the spirit of this motion rather than the motion itself. If I start with the obvious problem of a prerequisite being a bus service. By definition, a cemetery site must be in a large green open space that's not used heavily by the public. Such a site doesn't exist within the town boundary and therefore would be on the edge or on the outside of town. We don't generally have a bus service running to many of our smaller villages, let alone to a green open space that nobody currently uses. So a prerequisite of bus service is really quite wrong. But clearly there is a prerequisite, quite rightly, there should be a prerequisite to have a bus service before we start using the site, or as we use the site, or certainly a regular timetable public transport solution. And that I certainly support. And this motion simply asks council to believe that's what we want. And I'm happy to believe that that's what I want. In terms of the site, I'm not quite sure why we've ended up with such a hoo-ha over it. Very clearly in 2012 there was a detailed site selection process that went to committee. I sat in that committee, it was chaired by Councillor Marks, he probably remembers it, and we were faced with a number of sites. Clearly none of the sites would offer a long-term solution apart from the site in North Waltham. One of the sites put forward even involved co-locating the new football ground, which clearly wasn't going to work either. So Mr Mayor, I will support the motion because I really want this council to make it absolutely clear and leave no one any doubt that we have an absolute commitment to make sure that when that site goes into use, we should have a public transport set up, a solution that we will sustain and maintain for as long as is required until the site's big enough, obviously, to sustain its own bus service. Absolutely clear about that. But I don't think the site really now should be something we question. We've been through a process, it's been to 2 committees, and at no point has someone come up with a better site. There simply isn't green open space in the town area unless you want to take public green open spaces, and we've all sat here before making very loud and clear we value and want to protect our public green open spaces. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I find it amazing that we have 2,000 acres of land that is not built on in the town. It's called Manidown. Now, let me just ensure that you understand. It has never been the intention to build on all 2,000 acres. Never. We've already agreed that there would be a park within the Manidown arrangement. We've already agreed some of the areas for development which is not using up all the land available around it. And here we have a council that's looking for 15 acres to bury people for the town and the borough. And we want to spend £500,000 buying 15 acres when we own 2,000 acres. The 15 acres are so far away, people won't be able to get there. The 2,000 acres are next to Winklebury. In Manidown, there will be urban areas, and those urban areas will inevitably be serviced by a proper bus service, and it will work because the good urban areas designed into Manidown will be very attractive and they will be economically viable. So my suggestion, and I did go to the committee to tell them, by the way, but of course there was 2,000 acres, not enough land, so we have to go to North Waltham. The reality is we're totally mad to be spending more money that we allegedly don't have to buy 15 acres when we've already got lots of spare land in Manidown. But I will support this motion because I don't believe you will even listen. Bye.
Thank you, Councillor Keating. Councillor Regan.
Thank you, Mayor. I know I'm becoming the bus spokesman for some sort of reason, but whatever decision is made tonight on this motion, whether if it's rejected or accepted, it's going to be made by motorists. Vast majority of people are motorists. The media always talk about motorists. like it's some minority sport. It's the vast majority, and there's a few people like myself, who used to be motorists, for health reasons cannot drive. So it always makes me a bit more vigorous in speaking up for bus users. But also, I've got lower car ownership in my own particular ward, so I speak up for them. But what moved me for this, propose this motion, along with Councillor Harvey, is that the very thought that, you know, we all die. That's a fact of life. We all die at the end of the day, and people grieve. Do we really, really want to leave it to the vagaries of a taxi share scheme funded by 15 miserable pounds? If we have a real commitment to actually having a graveyard, wherever it is, because we do need one, we must build into the planning agreement to have a bus service. That's the only way. There is no way around it. And because of the current regulations of the Transport Act, no commercial service is going to take it on. No one. So it falls upon us, and I tell you what it's market economics, it's called market failure. Because the commercial will not pick it up, the private enterprise will not pick it up. So it falls upon the council to set aside money to fund a bus service. It doesn't have to be every hour, it has to be regular, it can do surveys and a needs survey, but also it must run on a Sunday. The ridiculous situation now at North Walthams, you can't go out to the crematorium on a Sunday. When's the day when you're going to go to mum and dad? A Sunday, but you can't get a bus. You've got to rely on the elderly. Have got to then rely on, you know, Aunt Joan or their son who's coming up from Somerset to give them a lift. It's ridiculous. It falls. It's a moral duty. I don't care about legislation. It's a moral duty to fund a bus service to the graveyard wherever it goes. So I move this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey, could you sum up?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I heard what the Cabinet member said. Transport will be available. It wasn't public transport, it wasn't accessible transport, it was transport. Now, we can consider other sites, we can talk about North Waltham, but if the reality is that you are going to say North Waltham is where this cemetery is going to be, and the debate with the funeral directors, the debate with the residents has been had, and that is where it's going to go for all of the reasons you're expressing, then the issue really does become, and as others have said, and I do agree with what others have said in regard to the transport issue, everybody has got to be able to access it. The comments that residents have passed back to us, such as, it's disgusting to even expect bereaved people to have to try to get all the way out there. I totally agree. Same issues getting to the crematorium. Mum doesn't drive, so it's only accessible when we take her. Ridiculous idea. Too far out of town. This must be reconsidered for the sake of the people of Basingstoke. And what about Sundays, as Councillor Regan has said, but a comment from a resident. What about Sundays? Many people will want to visit their loved ones on Sundays, won't they? This is a moral issue, yes. It isn't just a financial one. It isn't just a simple one in terms of it isn't our responsibility. Well, it is our responsibility because we're choosing to put a cemetery at North Waltham. We're choosing to do that for all of the reasons, for all of the constraints you've expressed. So what goes hand in hand with that? If it's North Waltham, we have to have accessibility. And the bus service is the one thing that will give everybody the opportunity to access the place, cycling aside, cars aside. In terms of indefinite funding, what's wrong with that if it's the principle of securing access to the cemetery in the way that we've described? I don't understand that argument because of the morality of it in the way that we're talking about it. And as far as a planning application goes, well, any planning application that is proposed must have a transport plan, and that transport plan must fulfil the issues associated with the proposed full use of the site. And if we're looking to turn a greenfield use into a cemetery, then I would expect that transport plan to have how you will access that cemetery. And I would expect a condition of that transport plan to be a bus route, public accessibility. So if the council's going to propose it, and if the Cabinet are going to bring it forward, we'll be looking for that in that planning application. And as I say, I've spoken to they don't want this site. The funeral directors don't want this site. They see the issues with it. But if we're going to have to go with this, we have to make it accessible to all, and that's the principle we're driving at here, respecting what everybody has said. Please support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. We will now move to a vote. If If you can just hold on while we get it set up. Right, the vote is now open. Any moment now, it should be. Yes. Right. One not yet voted, but I'm going to close the vote. Closed. The motion has been defeated. Moving on. Motion number 3, section 106, contributions. Mover, Councillor Bierman.
The wording of the motion is self-evident and will be supported all round, but after submitting it, I learnt that there was some confusion about the intent, so I will quickly say that really, however it's worded and however it's interpreted, the intent is that when a development is proposed and is starting to talk about things like 106 divvying up, that the ward members should have some part in that process, be it before it goes to committee or after it goes. Well, it certainly needs to happen before it goes to committee, but once it's gone to committee, things sometimes change and are varied, and it really needs the involvement of ward members throughout. Now, my being prompted to put forward this motion is twofold. One is, back in the middle of 2011, there was a fairly modest development being proposed in Chinham, and the would-be developer got quite hot under the collar about what was being suggested for his 106 money. And he got on to me, and I sort of discussed it with him, but I had to admit that I didn't know how the money was being proposed to be spent. And so I looked into it, and when I saw what was being proposed, I agreed with him totally that what was being suggested was inappropriate. So I got into discussion with the DC people, and they said, well, you know, it's all been discussed amongst officers, and it's almost cast in stone. Now, in the end, it was changed, thankfully, because the developer was ready, I think, to take legal action on the matter, and I think he would have stood a good chance of winning. The point was, though, that the disappointment of learning that we had so little involvement with the 106 process as members, and I say, when I first became a member, it was a total mystery. It was a sort of black art. Nobody knew how the 106s were divvied up at all, and who did it. And when you talked to an officer, most of the officers didn't know either. So it was remarkable that anything ever came out of it. But it moved from that, when we were told it was going to be totally transparent, to it being an officer thing, but no member engagement. Well, on this particular occasion, after my having made a bit of a fuss, it was agreed with the then head of development control that would have a little chat between ward members and the officers, and Councillor Miller and myself attended that meeting, and we were told that henceforth we would be told in advance what the officers were thinking and have an opportunity for input on how the 106 was going to be divided. I have to say that since that date, not once have I been consulted. I became interested in a development that might take place of interest to me. I'll be as casual as that because it's not gone forward as an application yet, but there are some pre-app discussions. And I have a list here of how the money for that particular development, were it to go ahead, would probably be split up. And we're down to the very last pound. It's amazing. We've got BEST, we've got community facilities, we've got open spaces, we've got playing fields, play areas, stroke recreation, and allotments. Now, I think allotments are very good. They're down even to pence. We've got a big sum plus 56 pence. Amazing. All this thought has gone into this, and none of the ward members know anything about it. So what's happened there in terms of the process? And the thing that, quite frankly, kicked it off was this amazing, unbelievable outcome of the Razors Farm public inquiry. Now, I have to say, I think common to all the local ward members, we were distracted by the bigger thing as to whether the thing should be happening at all and how you'd get in and out and how kids would go to school and so on. And so I don't think anybody was looking at the detail of the 106 money. But to learn now,
1 minute,
from the inspector's report, I need say no more, £250,000 going from Razors Farm right across to the other side of town for something that's not been discussed. It could have been that the ward members thought it was the best thing to do. And I'm sure the people living near Down Grange will be thrilled. But members haven't had any say in it. And the members might have had some idea because the pressure on the local infrastructure won't be in doubt. Just about everything in Chinham is going to be used, and nothing is going to be supported through the 106 process, as far as I know, unless there's something else hidden away. £250,000 for something unsustainable is disgraceful, and it shouldn't happen. And I hope in future, as a result of this resolution, ward members will always be engaged fully and completely throughout the process. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I'd like to congratulate Councillor Bierman on being exactly 5 minutes. Right, Councillor Tomlin. Councillor Tomlin, do you want to speak now?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I will speak now. I will be a lot shorter than 5 minutes, so have no fear. Obviously, I wish to second this motion. There's not really a lot more I can add to Councillor Bierman's explanation, but I have some comments. I do feel it's essential that there's a local ward member and even go as far as parish council involvement in the definition and subsequent allocation of the 106 funds. I mean, please consider that with our emerging local plan in place, and certainly in the northeast of the borough, we will have a number of development sites that will not be benefiting from any master planning, as is working for many down. These developments will be on an individual basis with individual applicants with their corporate ideas and views of how things should be. Also, the developments will come forward at different times. Therefore, you could argue the developments will be, to a large degree, isolated from each other. By having more local ward member input, then a degree of control might well be possible. Again, just taking Chinham as an example, there will be a number of developers, there are some already who have and are making claims that the local facilities of Chinham will be available to satisfy their application and their infrastructure needs. Now, all the proposed developments are outside of the ward, so any funding would technically fall into Bramley, Old Basing, Sherfield, Loddon, and so clearly bypass Chinham, where we might argue it's where the money should be spent. And as we have seen, without member involvement, as Councillor Bierman said about Razors Farm, surely here there was a need to spend this money to mitigate the impacts on Chinham and Bramley. And as a result, the contributions will be less effective. So I commend this motion and I hope you all can support it. Thank you.
Councillor Raphael.
Mr. Mayor, I have to say I have listened to what Councillor Bierman has said, and of course it falls into my portfolio, this particular topic. I also listened to what Councillor David Potter said yesterday at Development Control, and it seems to me that there is a degree of uncertainty by members, possibly all members, as to when they can engage with officers as to where Section 106 money should be spent and whether that engagement should be before determination, during determination, or after determination of an application. There are also some uncertainties as to the boundaries between officers and members, to the extent of when members are able to influence or decide where Section 106 money should be spent. So today I asked the Planning Development Manager to prepare a report on this subject, and I have asked that he set up an informal briefing for all members to be invited to, because it seemed to me that this didn't fall naturally just into development control, and it probably doesn't fall properly into the EPH committee, and it is relevant to all members. For all members to attend, to receive the briefing and to discuss and raise issues, and if that leads to further issues being raised and further discussion, well, so be it. And if it resolves matters to most people's satisfaction, well, so be that. But we won't know until we try, but it certainly needs to be a process. And I've asked for that to happen by the end of the year. It won't, I should say, development control is getting quite crowded. So it won't take up a development control night because there are a number of meetings coming. And so that's what I've asked. I hope you agree that that would be, I hope the movers of the motions agree that that's a satisfactory way forward for this. I have to vote against this motion because otherwise if you agree it becomes council policy, and it's highly likely many of you might support the motion. But don't take my vote against. It's merely to make sure it takes the path that I want it to take. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and my thanks to Councillor Ruffle for his comments in regard to. I raised this matter, as he said, at the Development Control meeting last evening, and I think there are many, if not all, of the colleagues on DC who agree with me that the whole issue around 106 agreements needs further explanation and discussion. The principle that this motion seeks to get at, and I'd extend it further, is really I think the lack of involvement of elected members in the whole process. I mean, if we claim to be anything, we're representing our communities. And if somebody asked me many times to report back why particular 106 agreements have been formed in the way that they have, I'd struggle, I think, to explain it. And the DC committee itself, I mean, when it talks in terms of 106 agreements, often relates to the sort of heads of agreement, the legal agreements. And I know these are legal agreements made between the parties, the developer and the local authority. But beyond that, we have no real understanding of the detail of those agreements. And as has been said already, the thing that brought it to my attention was the Razors Farm appeal, which actually went to appeal in April 2014. And in regard to the issues that have been raised around the Downgrange Sports Complex, this is a complex which is 7.5 miles from Razors Farm. I mean, it's a 15, 16 mile round trip. And the suitability of that in terms of the provision of sports facilities for that development is, quite frankly, a mystery to me, really. But in terms of the advice I had, in terms of the discussions that took place, it said at the time of the appeal, in April 2014, it was decided that the only deliverable scheme that met this was the Downgrange improvements. Now, I know Downgrange is the flagship facility for outdoor sport in Basingstoke. None of us would disagree with that. But whether that is suitable in the context of spending 106 monies emanating from Razors Farm, I think is a matter of debate. And it certainly should be a matter of debate for local ward members. And I look around and I think probably other members from Chinham would be equally unaware of these discussions, as certainly the DC committee was. And this is happening all the time. So consistent, I think, with what Councillor Raphael has said, I think we need much more open discussion on this. We need much more member participation in the composition of these agreements, and they need to be signed off in a different way to what they are now. Contrary to what Councillor Raphael says, and I'd ask him to reconsider it, I don't think these things are mutually exclusive. I think this motion can stand us in good stead, and the other processes that he described in terms of a workshop and other advisory processes can stand with it. So I will support this motion wholeheartedly. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Laura James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can I remind members of the National Planning Policy Framework? It advises that planning authorities should consider the use of planning obligations where they could make an otherwise unacceptable acceptable. Can I remind you also of Razor's Farm? It was 425 units, and it was exceptionally unacceptable to the community. So much so that we, as an authority, voted against it. It went to appeal, and we lost that appeal. The National Planning Policy then goes on to say they should only be used where it is not possible to address unacceptable impacts through planning conditions. And it goes on. Paragraph 204 states that planning obligations should only be sought where they meet all of the following tests necessary to make a development acceptable in planning terms, directly related to a development, fairly or reasonably related in scale and kind to a development. You could say that, you know, what we did and what happened as an authority was against the NPPF. Or you could say it was, you know, you could say it, I'm not saying we are saying it, but we could say it's actually unlawful what we did. Actually unlawful. Will the people of Chinham actually say that what we've done in Downgrange, we've made this development in Razor's Farm acceptable? I doubt it. I doubt it very much. I don't think it's acceptable that those people in Chinham now have to actually drive a 30-minute round trip. That's not acceptable. I welcome the measures that the Cabinet member is going to take, but I think he has to go further because the strategy from the member actually says, from the officer says, that it was reasonable to have a 30-minute trip, round trip. I mean, if that's the case, why didn't the development in Razor's Farm look at something, some open space and some parkland in East Woody? I mean, we could have done that, couldn't we? I mean, it's actually... I mean, I think that we have to go further. If our open space and parklands policy is actually saying it's reasonable for members, for the public to travel 30 minutes to their open space and parkland, I think we've got a problem, a serious problem in this council. But I think we need to be really mindful of what the NPPF states. And I think that what we did in relation to Razor's Farm doesn't meet that, and I hope that the residents of Chinham actually look at the test, because we haven't actually met that test, and therefore I think that they could actually challenge what has happened and what the developer and what our proposal has happened in taking forward our open space.
Thank you. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This attempts by members to change the process goes back many years, certainly for me personally. And I've managed to drag out of my memory a name of a planning manager, Giorgio Framelico. And you have to go back a few years to know that one. And he made an attempt at one committee that I attended to talk and persuade members that the system was working well and there was no real requirement for change. And it seems to be, my feeling is there seems to be a reluctance to let go. The motion talks about throughout. In my view, throughout has to mean from commencement. Members should be invited by the planning officers or a relevant officer. There should be an invitation, there should be a prompt to address the local community needs when there is an agreement or at the early stage of the planning process. Councillor Raphael talks about the planning manager being able to explain to members through a workshop when they can engage by influence, before, during or after. That could be articulated to all members by email. This seems to be potentially, and I don't think this is in his own case personally, but for me this means it's putting it back, putting it back yet again when we're not going to get any action. It's imperative that local ward members can influence the areas that are being discussed with developers for Section 106 agreements, and the moment there is receipt of monies, then they should be invited in by the officer. At the moment in time, the way the system currently works, there seems to be a requirement for a degree of investigative work by members to establish what the current situation is in relation to, in cases, some sizable sums of money. I will be supporting the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Gavin James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm absolutely going to support the motion. I think it's probably the best motion that Councillor Bierman's ever moved, and there's probably not a lot of competition, to be fair, but I think it's a fantastic motion. I'm a bit concerned at the portfolio holder's response to the motion about a report and a briefing that hardly any of us can come to or can't attend, detailing how we're supposed to get involved in the system. I'm in a ward that has a number of planning applications, unfortunately lots of conservation areas, and every time one of the banks wants to move their cash point 2 inches to the left, it's a planning application. And buried deep in amongst all those planning applications, which include things like McDonald's want to change the shape of their M, there are some meaningful ones that generate some 106 monies. Whenever I get a scheme in my head, or a resident comes and asks me to do something for them, and I say, I shall see if I've got any 106 monies, I ring the planning officers, I ask them how much 106 monies I've got. They're a bit ummy, a bit ahry, don't really want to tell me. And when I say, what about that development that happened 3 months ago, that new block of flats, what happened to the money for that? Oh, we've spent it. Well, I wasn't consulted, I was never asked, I was never told. It goes from 106 monies off to some departmental and just adjoins part of their budget and becomes the officer's decision. I would prefer not to dilute this motion down and actually get it to a point where all ward members are given an invoice every month saying this is what 106 monies you've got in your ward to spend. Officers can approach me about this is how I want to spend it. I may agree or may not. But I think we need to go a bit further than just having a workshop where we're told this is how you get involved in the process. We're very busy people. Some of us work full-time, and as I say, lots of planning applications come in. I can't track every single one. I just try and track the controversial ones. So I don't want the motion diluted. I absolutely support it, but I'd like to have a real outcome that makes it easy for me to track 106 monies and have some influence so I can represent my community effectively in how those 106 monies are spent. And that's what I'm here to do. The development impacts on the local community, surely, through me, they should be able to advocate how that's spent. Thank you.
Councillor Raphael.
I'm being misunderstood by the Liberal Democrats.
Not for the first time.
It's my intention, just so it's clear, and what I meant was this, it's my intention that all members will understand the process, even if they want to revisit what they then do with the money. But I don't think we all understand the process at the moment, so we need to be briefed on the process first and see where that takes us. Right, so I'm not saying that have a briefing and then go away and do nothing, which is what they're saying. I'm saying have a briefing, understand the process, then determine where we can interact and where we want to interact, and create policy on the back of that.
Councillor Parker.
I'm quite sure the new rules, but I think I've been misunderstood.
I'm sure somebody will apologise.
If I can clarify, my words I don't think inferred anything about there wouldn't be any action from the report that was being offered, so members could understand. I just feel there's no need for that delay. It can be done very quickly by email, and we can speed things up.
Right. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll try and be clear so I'm not misunderstood. What this motion is about, and actually what we're discussing here, and I think it's been exposed by everything everyone said really, is the age-old issue of the dark arts of Section 106 negotiations. And I assure you they are dark arts, and that's what worries me. Legal frameworks are legal frameworks, but you get there by negotiation. You get there by both parties sitting around a table and having a discussion about what's the application and what's impact it's going to have and what our officers have got a framework to negotiate to. We give them that. We give our officers that framework. So if it's wrong, we need to review it. And I think this motion points out that at the moment, that framework needs reviewing in the context of the issues that we're facing. And how do we get there? Because the negotiations are meant to be about the mitigation of development. It's not meant to be about we need 250 grand to spend on Down Grange and how we're going to get it. This is a convenient way of getting it. It's actually about what is Razors Farm going to do to Chinham and Bramley, and therefore what should that developer do to mitigate the impact of that development? And the money should be spent accordingly. When Lily went through, I want to see the money that comes out of Lily spent on Northern and the areas around Northern to support the community there. That's the point of it. And so on, and so on, and so on. So as a ward member, of course we've got direct interest in this, and we should be consulted and we should be involved at all three stages. Because the issue with the dark arts is the way that it changes through the process. Because what you agree, going to a heads of terms, being approved by a planning committee that don't get to see those heads of terms, you don't get to see the detail at planning, but you should because you're agreeing to it, you're agreeing subject to. And then going through to what is finally delivered when the developers try to get out of it on the other side, and they try and negotiate their way out of what they've agreed, is really the nub of all of this. And just going back to what Councillor Parker said, I remember being told by one officer in particular, head of planning, it's all about the disbenefit that a development causes to a community. The disbenefit. That's the wrong way to go about it. It's what the 106 monies can benefit a community is the right way to think about it. If we're going to have to take the development, then the existing community must benefit from that. So it isn't some excuse we're looking for, it's a proper negotiation. And Section 106, I think, can do so much more for our communities than it is doing. So positively, taking on board what the Cabinet member has said and taking on board what the motion's intentions are, positively, I think we should be looking to stretch, use, shape Section 106 monies far more constructively for the impact that development is having on our communities than we currently do. So it's about, all right, we've got a ton of planning experts in our planning officers that will give us their planning view. We are community experts. We're elected by our communities to represent them. We have just as much valuable input to that debate as our officers do. And that's the balance I think we need to strike, Mr. Mayor. So I'll support the motion, and I'd like to see action on the motion rather than leaving it. Because I think if we leave it, the danger is another application comes along and another conflict with the NPPF comes along. It is very clear what that states as planning policy, that 106 should be directly relevant to the application in question.
Thank you. Councillor Bierman, can you sum up?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm getting the feeling that this might just have general support. I tried to do a pithy little motion, much against my normal style, and I didn't think it would provoke quite so much. I think, though, a lot of it has been very useful input and broadened the topic and presented some of the issues. I do rather fear, I'm ready to be corrected by somebody more learned, that I suspect that as far as Razors Farm is concerned, as it is the Secretary of State having made the decision, we're stuck with it and we can't unwind it. I will, however, just quickly refer to a similar situation many, many years ago where it was intended to nick £1 million from Chinham and Lichpit and pop it into the town centre. Now, that wasn't anywhere near as big a transfer in terms of distance as we're talking about now. There was quite an outcry from local members. And thanks to cross-party support and good sense and good debate, the decision to take the £1 million from Chinham and partly Lichpit and stick it in the town centre swimming pool was reversed, and the £1 million was left in Chinham. Now, you wouldn't find many people who wouldn't agree that in the meantime, that money has been well spent. And the suggestion that was floating around was, oh, well, there wasn't a real need in Chinham. This was a sports barn when it was decided that sports barn weren't really the flavour of the year anymore. The money being suggested as not needed in Chinham has been put to very good use, and several people in this room have been a party to that use. And that use is almost complete because it's almost spent now. But the suggestion that there wasn't a local need was quite wrong. and the local knowledge helped to show where the need was and apply the money well. I just, in closing, like to appeal to the possible soft spot in the portfolio holder's heart, if there is that, and ask him to reconsider his voting against this motion. I welcome his suggestion. I don't think it can be done by email because personal interchange and debate sometimes does bring out good ideas and so on. And so I do think a little workshop or seminar on the topic, for those that can find the time and are committed to come, would be useful. But I do think it would be a shame not to go forward with this motion at this point in time, having had a decision, because we all know once things go to workshops, they can dribble on forever and get lost. If we have this motion through, it doesn't conflict with having the workshop. The workshop can be to hone the details. And I do accept there's certain aspects that could be a little more complex and need a little more precision in definition. But for the moment, the intent is here in the motion, I hope. I hope it's quite clear now after the debate what the intent is, certainly after my personal remarks on it. And I can't see a good reason for not passing the motion and then looking at the implementation in the weeks ahead, as long as it is then implemented. So let's see whether the portfolio holder has a soft spot in his heart. With that, I beg to move the motion and ask for your support.
Are there likely to be any votes against, or are we all agreed? Then we'll go to a vote.
Mr. Mayor, I'm not quite sure under this process a record will be kept of this vote now, because yes, okay, that's fine.
Right, we are ready to go. We are going to open the vote. Right, if you're ready. They're not voting. You can abstain by pressing the third button if you want. You can abstain by pressing the third button if you want. There are a lot of people who haven't voted yet. Okay, we can close the vote. Well, it's clearly carried. And we'll refer it to the portfolio holder. Right, moving on. Item 10. We've received the minutes of the following meetings. Are there any questions, or can we take those en bloc? Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The minutes of the council meeting, 17th of the 7th, pages 4933, referring particularly to the minute recorded on page 4936 and 4937, where bizarrely council refused to set up some funds. But if you look at the fourth bullet point on page 4937, you'll see need a longer-term solution to address the flooding issues in Buckskin and should use some of the reserves to do that. I was wondering what plans had been made. It was really a question, I guess, directed at the leader. What plans have been made to at least help the possibility, and in fact we think it's a probability, according to the Environment Agency, they think it's very likely that the same amount of rain will fall this year, and therefore the same difficulties in Buckskin will occur, and it would be a real shame, Mr. Mayor, if we didn't have a plan up front to ensure that people are at least protected, although they will still be affected.
That was addressed to the leader.
I think, as Councillor Pearce knows, because he sits on the same committee that I do, there's a whole group of officers working at trying to ensure that there is not a recurrence of the flooding that happened last year in the coming winter months. A series of proposals are being put forward. They have to come for consideration. We have another meeting, I think, next week or the week after. I can't remember the exact date. It is certainly not, I don't think, from lack of attention that this issue is being considered, and we will have to await the outcome of the recommendations from officers from various organisations, our own Hampshire County Council, who are, of course, are the leaders on flood issues, but also of other interested parties such as the Environment Agency, the water authorities, etc., etc.
Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is referring to the scrutiny meeting, 31st of July, pages 4976 to 4981. My question to the portfolio holder. Considering the high number of responses to the public consultation regarding the proposals for Basingstoke Town Football Club new stadium, would Councillor Isett confirm whether he will be in a position to advise the outcome of the analysis of the responses by the end of October, or if not, provide an indication of a possible date in November, a possible time frame in November?
Thank you, Councillor Parker. The consultation has closed quite recently, and I'm very pleased with the level of public engagement with this. I'm told today that we had 852 responses in relation to Old Common and 313 in relation to Camrose site, many of them online. He will know that the consultation is not just quantitative, but it's qualitative as well. People were asked to provide their views. And so where we are at the moment is that officers are collating all that information and putting forward the results. I haven't got those yet. As far as timetable is concerned, it won't be in October, but I would hope that we'll be able to come back. I hope that I will have the assessments, the results from the officers during the first half of November.
Supplementary?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I thank the portfolio holder for that response. I too am very pleased with the high number. Would the portfolio holder assure us that he will not make a decision until at least 14 days after the relevant ward members have been given the opportunity and time to examine the consultation responses, so that they too can consider and respond in light of those responses?
In principle, I've got no problem with that.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Page 5083 is the Cabinet meeting, and I'm referring to the item regarding SIL. Can I ask the Cabinet member, Mark? 5083. Right at the back, right at the back. Right. It's regarding the SIL decision of Cabinet, Mark. Obviously, that relates directly to the local plan. What I'd like to ask you, Mark, if it's possible, Councillor Raffel, in regard to the other part of my comments earlier, obviously the letter received from the local plan inspector raises some pretty serious issues, some very serious issues. I appreciate that you will be considering your response and going through it in some detail. Could I ask you to share your thoughts at an appropriate time, sooner rather than later, hopefully, with members? I know you've done that throughout the process in the way that you've engaged the committee, but in terms of timetabling agendas and when these things are going to be considered, this letter is of such significance. I think members should hear from you, and we should understand how you're going to respond, or the council will respond, to the pretty serious issues raised by that local plan inspector, the fundamental concerns that he says he has.
Well, there we are. Mr Mayor, of course, everything will be done transparently because every response is placed on a website, so all members can see it. It's a very important part of where we need to be with the local plan at the moment. I have analysed it a bit like cricket. I'm not very good at cricket, but I've got a bit better recently, having to bowl and bat for my son. When the first ball is delivered and goes winging past your ear, you realise what the next 5 are going to be like. And you just settle down and deal with it. And that's exactly where we are at the moment. We put into bat, we knew there was going to be some bowling, and we've got to respond to it. The responses will be robust and detailed. They will defend our position to the utmost. And we believe that we have put forward a strong evidence-based plan that can be defended robustly against those who may want to alter it. The opening salvos, when one looks at them in detail, deal with a number of different topics which are, to some extent, possibly contradictory in the sense of the inspector is looking at different topics and saying, well, how have you dealt with this and how have you dealt with that? But if you had read anything into it, they actually might be competing topics rather than ones that form a sequential line of thought. We believe that in many areas a little bit more explanation will actually answer the questions that have been raised at the early stage. The important date that's been tabled today or yesterday is the 11th of December, where there will be a public meeting, which I suspect is going to be here, where the inspector will deal with some of these earlier issues. And at that stage we'll know whether the speed of the progress of the draft local plan. And some of the issues will have fallen away by then, others may have arisen, and others may still need to be answered, but we won't know what they are until we get to that point. So it is fast moving, we knew it would be, and we're prepared.
Supplementary?
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate what you're saying. At the same time, you don't want to be stumped, you don't want to be caught out, and you certainly don't want to be run out. Just in the context of all of this, I think it would be good, because the 11th is going to be a presentation, obviously, of the arguments. And I think the issue with the inspector's letter is that it may well result in options that result in the inquiry being stopped, or the inspector taking a view of it sent back for more consideration. So the transparency that you talked of has been absolutely fair so far. Would be good, I think, to hear members, to have members detail of what you're proposing or what is being put forward by the officers on our behalf. To see that detail, Mr Mayor, to the Cabinet member would be most helpful, I think.
Mr Mayor, I can answer that. Every response will be on the website. So the whole process is now transparent. And I'm not saying it wasn't before, but it's because it's in the public domain. And my understanding is that every response from the officers to the points raised, every letter, will be on the website. And so, the meeting, the options that were put forward was steady as she goes, pause, stop, and any variety in between. So we won't know which of those we will for such time as we've had that meeting. So let's keep going as steady as she goes.
Right, thank you for that. We can now move on to item 11. Questions from members of the Council on notice. Question 1 from Councillor Sherlock.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Would the Leader agree that the excellent results from the resident survey are a reflection of this administration's focus on delivering value and eliminating waste? Would he also agree that they reflect the hard work, ingenuity and commitment of all the staff to maintaining and improving the high level of service which this survey demonstrates that this Council is providing for its Council taxpayers?
Councillor Sherlock.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not surprisingly, I do indeed agree with the sentiments expressed by Councillor Sherlock. The results of the resident survey are exceptional. They are probably better than achieved by almost any other council in the country. And they're results of which we should all be proud. And especially so because they're not a sudden spike, but they show a steady, significant, sustained improvement over a period of 5 or more years in residents' opinion of the quality of life where they live and of this council's performance. And this is a steady improvement achieved against the background of one of the deepest financial recessions in living memory. Now, of course, we mustn't sit back and think that the job is done. In fact, quite the reverse. The borough is on the threshold of achieving enormous steps forward in terms of economic vitality and the benefits that will bring for residents. Around us, we see John Lewis springing out of the ground, Network Rail and Sainsbury's expansion nearing completion, and work starting on a series of much-needed road improvements. But there are still some who are not sharing fully in the economic growth, and we have to make sure that the most vulnerable and those in genuine need in our community are also safeguarded. There is still a lot to do if we are to secure the exciting future that is on offer. But it is our staff who have been the heroes. They have seen significant changes in their workplace through considerable uncertainty, but nevertheless have contributed enormously to finding new ways to do even more, but with less. That's how we've been able to take 7 million out of our costs, yet provide services which our residents see are getting better and better, giving real value for money. And because they've done that, we have not had to increase the council tax burden on our residents for the last 5 years. And there will be no increase again next year. Our staff deserve our thanks and appreciation for their efforts over the last years. The resident survey is a testament to their effectiveness. I'm therefore intending to ask the Human Resources Committee to consider making a cross-party recommendation to Council that our employees are each awarded a bonus of up to £100 this Christmas to reflect the significant contribution that they've made over a prolonged period to making Basingstoke and Deane a better place to be. I would hope that all members of the Council would wish to join me in seeing our staff fully appreciated.
Councillor Sherlock, do you have a supplementary? Right, second question is from Councillor Hussey to the Leader of the Council.
Mr Mayor, would you please accept my apologies? I should have spoken to you prior to the meeting, and that was remiss of me. This morning I was in dialogue with officers. My question has been answered. I've asked supplementary questions and they're being researched. Therefore, this question this evening is redundant and I would like to withdraw it.
I'm delighted to hear that the officers were able to satisfy you. Just shows how good they are. Thank you. There being no further business, I can declare the meeting closed. I'd like to thank you all for some interesting debate tonight and a very prompt finish. Thank you.